was about to turn back at last when she spotted something strange ahead. Here was a mystery worth investigating. Here was something that would make a great story. Lying in the grass beside the cabin was a carcass. Fuck Stephen King. Fuck mysteries of the unknown. Unable to resist the urge, she shined the beam into the woods. She could feel the enormous weight sagging the steel above her. She could hear its breathing, sense its predatory hunger. Maybe you've never gone camping, but I've always been intrigued by the idea. A nice break from the hustle and bustle of daily life, a chance to commune with nature. Open sky, dense woods, natural waters, no cell signal, no electricity, a time of solitude. Maybe even the mystery of what goes on in the parts of the world that are little touched by humans has some appeal. Susan Miller-Jones felt the same way. And finally, she decided to make it a reality. She spent weeks researching and planning her trip. It would be an adventure. Staying out in the woods on her own would be an achievement. Something she'd be proud to tell her friends about. A fateful decision, unfortunately. It would be the last such trip she'd ever make. Spring fades fast in Texas, and the summer heat falls onto the region like a hot blanket. Susan had scheduled the trip for the weekend, and Friday evening when she got off work, she made final preparations. Before that, she'd purchased clothing, gear, and food. She'd read articles online and chosen what seemed to be a perfect location. Susan was a city girl with little experience at the outdoors. But always a detailed planner, she felt she was ready. Of course, camping is very daunting for the inexperienced, no matter how much you plan and how hard you prepare. And it's not a good idea to make your first trip alone. But Susan could be a bit of a loner. She had a small circle of close friends, but there are times you just want to be alone. And for Susan, the prospect of being away from computers and phones was half the appeal. Living in Dallas was fun. The city boomed with activity. She had a good job at one of the many art museums in the area. Having moved from Fort Worth, where her parents still lived, she'd been here 2 years. Close to her parents, she went home often. Still, though her life was pretty good, she felt something might be missing. Her mom said she had a nomadic spirit. She'd often find her daughter's bed covered with travel brochures of faraway places. Many of these magazines still came to Fort Worth in the mail, and Susan came home regularly to collect them. She was already awake at 5 a.m. when the alarm went off. Time for her first adventure beyond travel brochure dreams. Her destination? Elmendorf. Now, you might have heard of the legends of Elmendorf, and consequently, you might have advised she camp somewhere else. But poor Susan, the busy city girl dreaming of distant lands, sadly had not heard the legends. However, had she heard of the mythical beast, she would likely have scoffed anyway. She did not take seriously the notion of creatures undiscovered by science, especially not a relatively short drive from Dallas. But Texas has always been a state filled with unexplained creatures. For example, the wild man from Navidad, first reported in 1837. Slaves along the Navidad River called it the thing that comes. For though no one saw it, there was always evidence that something had come. The creature was most often described as covered in short brown hair and very nimble, which allowed for it to elude capture. Of course, you've probably heard of the legendary chupacabra, or goat sucker, said to drink the blood of livestock. Another mythical creature is La Lechuza, some kind of owl monster. This legend of ancient folklore is said to be a witch that can turn into a large owl and prey on solitary travelers. Is it possible that the myth is based on a large predatory owl not documented by science? Owls are hunters of the night that are heard but almost never seen. If ever a creature existed that could hide from scientists, it might be a rare species of owl. Of course, Texas is well known for Bigfoot sightings. And Native American legends famously talk about skinwalkers, shape-shifting humans that can change into predatory animals. Fort Worth itself has its own legendary creature, one which reportedly attacked a resident named John Reichert. His wife and 2 other couples parked at Lake Worth. The scaly monster allegedly slammed into Reichert's car and tried to haul away Mrs. Reichert. The only physical evidence was the damaged car and an obscure photograph. And we're not even going to go into the widespread UFO sightings. So, there's plenty of reason to be wary of camping out in the Texas woods alone. Susan, driving with the maps and printed directions on her car seat, had none of this in mind. GPS guided her with all the precision of modern science. Elmendorf is a 4-hour drive from Dallas. There was little traffic on this fine Saturday morning. At 7 a.m., surveillance caught her car pulling into a highway truck stop. She stretched her legs, used the restroom, took a photo of the gorgeous sunrise, and posted it, of course, on Instagram. Back on the highway, she drove filled with a combination of excitement and peace. The city was far behind her. Did a sense of foreboding also enter her mind as she got closer to her destination? We can't know. Reaching her exit, she glanced around, always observing, always planning for emergencies. Susan noted the gas station, a burger place, and a hotel. A hotel! Hotels were for wimps. A short time later, she arrived at Brawning Lake and joined a queue of vehicles waiting to get onto the camping grounds. Opening her window, she breathed in the lush, sweet air. She was surrounded by dense forest, broken up only by patches of field with long grass. No Starbucks or streetlights or taxicabs. Her spirit already felt freer, even if deep underneath it all a growing unease festered. She paid her fee with the ranger, taped her pass to the interior of the windshield, and drove on in. The lake sparkled blue, cattails and shrubbery lining the shore. She passed families in their campsites. The scent of grilled meat filled the air, causing her stomach to growl. How should she choose her campsite? Remember, she was a noob, no experience. But solitude was the goal, and the spirit of adventure the theme. She drove on deeper, around the lake and further into the woods. Only when she had not seen another soul for a considerable time did she finally stop. This was the spot. When Susan got out of the car, once again her first order of business was taking pictures. To people under 30, living life and documenting it for social media go hand in hand. Only now, of course, the photos would not upload, no cell signal. Those tranquil photos remained in her phone, however, and we can show them to you now. At last, she put her phone away. Time to prepare her campsite. The only sign of human beings were a few distant rowboats. She unloaded her car. It took her the rest of the morning to set up the tent. Her very first tent. She squealed to herself with delight. She snapped a photo of it, just couldn't help herself. The thought of taking a nap in her brand new sleeping bag was tempting. Instead, she walked around her camp area. Solitude can be complexing for city folk. What is there to do? She was about to return to the tent and read a book she had packed, Stephen King's It, when she spotted an almost completely hidden entrance to a path into the woods. To a seasoned camper, such a path might produce a yawn or perhaps even a sense of caution. Predatory animals often wait along paths to pounce on unsuspecting deer. To a city girl out on an adventure, however, a path presents an exciting opportunity. Where does it lead? Who or what has used it? Unable to resist, Susan started down the path with barely a second thought. As she walked, she didn't worry about being able to find her way back because all she would have to do was follow the path in reverse. She couldn't remember the last time she felt this excited. At times, the path went through woods so dense it seemed later in the day than it was. But then the trees would open up into the field, and the bright sun renewed her confidence. Not a cloud in the sky. Brief doubt came over her with the path reached a fork. She would have to choose. Now, this is probably where the city dweller should turn back. But Susan was now driven by feelings of joy that she hadn't even known was capable of. She chose the path leading towards the lake, which she could see glimmering a distance away. Delighted, she carried on, careful to mind the many roots and small boulders which make the path tricky. Squirrels stopped chattering to watch her go by, while unseen birds squawked their alarms in the tree canopy. Her next major decision came when the path was blocked by a flooded area. The water wasn't deep, just some overflow from a stream swollen with spring rain. But she certainly didn't want to get her feet wet. However, it seemed she could walk over a gentle hill in the woods and pick up the path somewhere on the other side of the water. She stood a long moment weighing it. She finally decided to risk it, since she could still see the lake to her right. And if she somehow lost the path, she could always head toward the water. When she got onto the other side of the flooded area, she couldn't spot the path where she expected it to be. Scanning the woods, sometimes she would think she spotted it, but then not be sure. Her eye was not used to the forest. She didn't want to head into the woods where she couldn't see the lake unless she found the path, so she kept walking further around the flooded area. At last, right before giving up and turning back, she found the path. Or at least, a path anyway. Against any instinct of common sense and defying any creeping anxiety, she started walking again into the unknown. She had no sense of direction, east, west, north, or south, and the small hills made the lake invisible behind her, the woods growing thicker and darker. Again, she came to a fork. She didn't even stop, deciding that as long as she kept taking the right turn, when she returned, she would just stick to the left turns. If only the woods were that simple. After some time, with anxiety now drowning out the excitement about adventure, she came to a swamp. Could there be gators? Snakes? The birds were quiet here, no wind. The sunlight was filtered out by the canopy. The scent of decay stole her breath. She took a photo. Was about to turn back at last when she spotted something strange ahead. A tiny cabin or cottage right in the middle of a dry patch within the swamp. The walls of the cabin were unpainted and covered with vines, the roof warped with age. A small opening in the wall served as some kind of window. From this distance, it looked open to the elements. Certainly no one had lived in this shack for many years. Here was a mystery worth investigating. Here was something that would make a great story. More importantly, here was something that would make a great pic for Instagram. Maybe she'd even shoot a little video. And the path led right to the little structure. She started forward. About 50 yards later, she felt surrounded by swamp on all sides. Impossibly, the cabin looked no closer. Looking down, she noticed the dirt on the path seemed scuffed, like something had been dragged over it. Still, she kept going. She kept watching the swamp on either side, wary of alligators. She eyed the path in front of her, terrified a snake would cross. And slowly the cottage seemed to be getting closer. covered in brown moss. A shaft of sunlight struck it, giving it a yellowish tinge. On the path, she spotted smudges of brownish red. Blood? Then patches of what looked like leathery skin. But the shack loomed just ahead. No going back now. The patch of dry land around the building was larger than she had expected, though still small, maybe a quarter of a football field. On all sides, the swamp surrounded it as far as she could see. She suddenly didn't want to approach it. This was plenty close enough for a good photo, and to people Susan's age, it's all about the photos. She started to reach for her pocket when something caught her eye and her hand froze. Lying in the grass beside the cabin was a carcass. Squinting her eyes in the obscured light, she decided it was a cow's carcass, but that was based just on the size, for the thing had been completely skinned. A large crater surrounded by dry blood existed where the anus should be. She observed that the slanted roof of the cottage was covered in bones. Or maybe it was made of bones. The urge to flee was upon her, but she stood silent until she heard something coming towards her from the waters of the swamp. Something large. Something coming fast. Finally, her legs found their strength. She ran back along the path, recklessly neglecting to watch before her. Lucky that she didn't trip and fall. Leaving the swamp, she kept running, only slowing a little. After tripping on a root and landing face first in the pine needles, she dusted herself off, checked herself for injuries, then started off again at a brisk walk. Her hearing was becoming acute, like that of a veteran woodsman, and she heard no animal following. Still, she couldn't wait to get back to her tent and her car. But going back turned out to be nothing like going in. The journey from campsite to cottage had maybe been an hour and a half. Now she traveled the path for hours. She came to forks, went left, and never seemed to find herself within the sight of the lake. The afternoon grew longer, the light dimmer. Hunger gnawed at her strength. She recalled the grilled meat of the other campers. Panic began to set in when she saw the sun burning red just over the horizon. In moments it would be gone. Soon the woods would be black and the path, if she was even on the right one, invisible. Her phone could give her only a brief time of light. Was she traveling in circles? The thought induced more panic. She was close to hyperventilating. However, against all odds, she actually emerged from the woods right by her campsite as the sun dipped out of sight. Shivering despite the heat, she climbed into her truck and started it up. Sobs sent tears down her face and shudders through her bones. And she hadn't even gotten the picture of the shack. Terrified, she had never pulled out her phone. So this was solitude. Not all it was cracked up to be. She put the car in drive and started back, creeping by the family sitting peacefully at their bonfires, returning friendly waves, turning on the radio and letting Leonard Skinner's Sweet Home Alabama struggle through the static to comfort her. Fuck Stephen King. Fuck Mysteries of the Unknown. By the time she'd reached the burger joint at the highway stop, she'd calmed down. Relieved to be surrounded by fast food loving people, she nonetheless ordered the burgers to go and headed back to camp. She had left behind her tent, her sleeping bag, and her dignity. But it was still early. The prospect of spending 8 hours alone in the tent at night did not appeal at the moment. She decided to kill some time driving around the town a little bit by the highway stop. She ended up on a lonely road that runs along the lake. Here and there a farmhouse, but mostly woods or fields with grass that seemed unreasonably tall for this time of year. She was uneasy. Her phone sat on the car seat, the safety of GPS ready if needed. Suddenly something dark darted alongside the car, something large. Distracted, she didn't spot the curve in the road. The car flew off it and struck a small tree. The airbag deployed. Her cell phone bounced off the seat and disappeared on the floor. Shit. She put the car in reverse, but the engine sputtered and then died. She needed to check the damage to see if the car was even drivable, assuming she could succeed in restarting it. Reaching into the glove compartment, she grabbed a flashlight, part of her diligent preparations. Unbuckling the seatbelt, she ventured out, checking herself for injuries. Stars twinkled above, her eyes strained in the darkness. The black treetops swayed in the gentle wind. With the flashlight, she inspected the front of the car. Damage seemed minimal. Maybe she just needed a jump. She shivered in the breeze. The nearby woods drew her attention. It was quiet. She told herself it was just her imagination. What if she shined the flashlight into the woods? One instinct told her not to. It felt like the beam of light would violate the world of the little night creatures. She was a city girl, but her grandparents had a house on the edge of some woods. Those woods were not very deep, but as a young girl, they seemed deep enough. Many times when staying overnight, she had shined a flashlight into the woods, her mind filled with all kinds of imaginary creatures which might be watching her from the dark. But never did her light touch on anything other than branches and trunks. Unable to resist the urge, she shined the beam into the woods. Nothing stirred. Only a second or two after scanning with the beam, she gasped. Two large eyes stared right back at her. So bright were those eyes under her powerful flashlight that they looked almost like headlights. She flicked the flash off. The eyes disappeared. After flicking it back on again, there they were. She backed towards the open car door, and those eyes turned ever so slightly to follow. Her breathing stopped while her heart raced. The legend of the Chupacabra began, as far as anyone can tell, in Puerto Rico. The first specific case was when a woman described a monstrous, spiky creature climbing up the side of her house. She later found her barn animals drained of all blood. In Mexico and Texas, the creature is described with more canine characteristics, though still a creature that sucks the blood from livestock. During the spring of 2004, Elmendorf rancher Devin McNally shot such a creature after it had been raiding his chickens for days. Here's a photo of Devin and what he shot. The creature was hairless, had pronounced fangs and a rat-like tail. Arthur Whitley Schreiber paid to have it DNA tested. Before the results came in, experts decided it was a coyote with mange. But DNA tests suggested it was some type of domestic canine. Its odd appearance could not be explained. A thought-to-be-extinct species called the dire wolf lived as recently as 4,000 years ago. This beast grew to 7 feet in length and almost 4 feet tall. Those measurements are based on discovered fossils, so it's possible it grew even larger. You might think, based on the beasts created in the series Game of Thrones, that dire wolves were northern creatures, accustomed to snow and cold. Nope. The dire wolf evolved in South America and made its way north as far as Texas. Could a population have survived? Something large enough to drag a cow had taken one on that little island in the swamp where the shack stood. Susan scrambled back in her car and slammed the door, frantically turned the key. The engine sputtered, but to her amazement came on. Headlights sliced into the forest. She put her car in reverse, but the wheels spun in the mud. Her eyes on the woods, she tried again. A shadow dashed across the beams from her car. She hit the gas again. Tires spun fruitlessly. The shadow sprinted towards her, leaped into the air, barely touching the hood, then landed on the roof. She could feel the enormous weight sagging the steel above her. She could hear its breathing, sense its predatory hunger. Her foot pushed the pedal to the floor. The tires spun a cloud of dirt behind her. The smell of rubber made her eyes water. The car began to rock. Deep breaths. This time she hit the gas slow and steady. The car spun out onto the road. She jammed it into drive and floored it. When the creature jumped off the roof, the car, liberated of the weight, picked up more speed. Slowly, her heart rate returned to normal. She found her way back in the direction of the camp. Highway 38 runs along the lake and has a speed limit of 35. Susan was going perhaps only 25 because her hands were still trembling. which turned out to be very fortunate. As she came around a broad turn, a dark shadow appeared dead center in the road. She slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a stop just inches from the unmoving mass on the road. Another dead cow. Her nerves totally shot by now, she gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. A beam from the headlight touched part of the carcass. Again, she made out the bite taken out of the animal's anus. There were no other cars on the road. She backed up a little so she could drive around the cow. But Susan had always been guided by a sense of responsibility, of doing the right thing. If a vehicle hits this carcass at a high speed, it could be a serious accident. She put the car in park, took a deep breath. You can do this, she told herself. She popped the trunk, opened the door. Flashlight in hand, she jumped out and hurried to the trunk. To her right, the waters of the lake shone black under a silver moon. To her left, the dense woods. Under a mat beneath the spare, she found what she was looking for, a flare. A moment later, a bright pink flame. She dropped it beside the carcass. Then something heavy moved through the woods. A shrieking howl. Shit. She hurried back into the car and slammed the door, put the car in gear and skidded around the dead cow. What the hell was going on around here? She fought tears. A minute or so later, she made a decision. That one summer of playing Grand Theft Auto in high school paid off as she pulled a 180 on the deserted highway that would have made any Talladega driver proud. To hell with the tent. She was going back to Dallas. By the time she got home, she convinced herself it would be best to never think of this adventure again. She could be good at that, putting uncomfortable things out of her mind. While she had always been a dreamer, it was to the future her mind always went. The past she put behind her. She was a full steam ahead kind of girl. But over the next couple of weeks, the news brought her back to her terrifying camping experience. Several stories came about an ongoing problem with livestock mysteriously disappearing or being found mutilated, all in the area of Elmendorf. She thought of the carcass on the road. She thought of the thing that leaped onto the roof of the car, those eyes in the woods, that howl in the night. But mostly what gave her nightmares was that rotten little shack in the middle of a swamp with a roof made of bones and a skinned cow by its side. And she decided to go public with her story. We've reached out to her in the hopes of doing an interview. In the meantime, please help us out by hitting subscribe, and if you're really feeling generous, hit like.